Hi everyone, my name is Cora Stewart, and for my final project topic, I decided to choose Women in Hollywood Through the Ages. Women's position in society has changed pretty drastically through the years. I've always been fascinated with Hollywood and the idea of celebrities, so that's kind of why I chose this topic. Whether or not we care to admit it, Hollywood celebrities do tend to influence society in every decade, starting with the very first celebrities when the television first came out. Um, Women like Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe in particular shaped women throughout the ages, even long after both of them passed. Even up to modern day, they're still considered some of the most influential female celebrities of all time. So for my article, I chose the JSTOR article called Trousers and Tiaras, Audrey Hepburn. So this article focused mainly on Audrey Hepburn, but it does mention Marilyn Monroe. So this article was about how Audrey Hepburn, quote, embodied the idea of femininity for generations of women, end quote. So basically, she became this icon of fashion, makeup, hair, everything about her. Women looked up to her and wanted to be like her. And her kind of peak in film was probably between the 50s and 60s, although she acted around those two dates. That's kind of when she peaked in her career. One thing that I liked that the article mentioned was called the Cinderella motif. So that was described by some of the directors for Hepburn as she tried on some of the fashion designs for the movies. Quote, fairy tale femininity she embodied in her real life. So she tried on these dresses and it made her feel a lot more confident about herself, and it made her feel definitely very feminine, and the directors kind of saw that within her. But the Cinderella motif is more focused on Hepburn's individual childhood. She grew up in World War II. She was very malnourished. She spent years in a cellar. She had a lot of struggles in her childhood, and she wanted to become one of the biggest celebrities of all time. So that kind of Cinderella thing where she went from living in a really difficult situation to becoming this glorious feminine woman. I really like that the article mentioned that. Some of her one of her looks was called the Hepburn style, and it was the idea of having a tiny waist, slim trousers, and ballerina skirts, which is like a really long, flared skirt, very feminine and very appealing on a woman. That became known throughout the world as her style, and everybody loved that style and wanted to be like that. Women everywhere admired her for her adversity. Again, going back to the Cinderella motif where she grew up in a really difficult situation, a lot of people really admired her for changing her life and making it better. Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe, embodied two different body types, but they were both heavily criticized for their figure. We'll see more in the pictures. So these are just a bunch of pictures of Audrey Hepburn and Marilyn Monroe. Audrey is the brunette, Monroe is the blonde. So in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see kind of a poster for Audrey Hepburn's most famous movie called Breakfast at Tiffany's. And the outfit that she's wearing, the long black dress, the long opera black gloves, became very iconic. It's still used as Halloween costumes and cosplay up to this day. So you can see that the two women were both healthy, but they were both heavily criticized. Monroe was criticized for being too big, where Audrey was criticized for being too thin. And it's very sad because these two women have gone down in history as two of the most beautiful women of all time, yet they were scrutinized on a daily basis for something that they had no control over. But Hepburn was definitely a little bit more traditional and conservative in her style choices, where Monroe was a little bit more flaunting. So that's something that each of them are known for. So my analyzation of the article, I thought the author went into really great detail about the criticisms of Hepburn and Monroe um, as people, but also as their figure. I think that that would be really helpful to my project um, because even, like I said, even two of the most beautiful women in history were really heavily criticized, and that's really sad to think about, and it still happens to this day. Hepburn and Monroe are both idolized in modern day, even though Marilyn Monroe died in the 60s and Hepburn died in the early 90s, so they both have been dead for quite some time, and yet women still grow up wanting to be like them, even in 2020. One thing that I was a little disappointed about was that the article didn't mention Hollywood's treatment of women. Um, a whole lot, which is kind of what I want to focus on my project about, but I do think that it went in really great detail, especially about the Cinderella motif. I think that that's a really great addition to my project about women's portrayal in society. So here are some of the pictures from the article, some of the screenshots. On the right, you can see the picture quality in the article wasn't great, but you can see she's again wearing black, more of a traditional dress, but it definitely was very iconic. And on the left, you can see some of the interesting quotes. In the top one, you can see how Hepburn is criticized for being too thin and described even as boyish because she didn't have the figure as Monroe. In the middle one, it talks more about how she wore trousers and ballerina skirts, which were her Hepburn style, and she wore flats. She didn't really wear heels very often, and she wore a lot of black, which again contributes to her style. And then in the bottom text box, it talks about some of her most favorite, some of her most famous movies, like Roman Holiday, Breakfast at Tiffany's, My Fair Lady, Sabrina. Those were some of her most favorite or her most famous ones, although she was in plenty of others. And then here are my citations for the source, including the what's it called? The website. Thank you.